following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. I got trapped on an alpine coaster for hours. You guys know what an alpine coaster is? They are like a small roller coaster you find in the mountains. They are also called summer toboggans or mountain coasters, and I think there's some long German compound word they are called in parts of Europe. They are like a roller coaster, but with much smaller 1 or 2 person sleds you just sit on instead of multi-person cars you ride in. And instead of being built with like a scaffolding or a framework, the tracks are just on the ground, using the elevation of the mountain. Basically, it's a coaster track on the side of a mountain where you ride a sled down. They are pretty fun, or at least I used to think so. They are more personal than roller coasters, and although you get nowhere near the speed on them that you do on a good traditional roller coaster, and they can't do corkscrews or loops or anything like that, the openness and simplicity of the ride gives an impression of a much greater speed. You're just sitting there with nothing but a little plastic sled and the track between you and the ground as it goes zooming by. It's like the difference between how fast a go-kart feels compared to how fast a sports car feels. You know, the sports car goes faster, but the open simpleness of a go-kart feels a different kind of fast. There's plenty of POV YouTube videos if you want to get the basic idea of what they are. I used to love alpine coasters. Used to. My family used to go to Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and up and down the Smoky Mountains for vacations when I was a kid, and they are common in that area, and I'd always rode them every chance I got. But as with so many things after I grew up and went to college, they just became part of my childhood that slipped away. They aren't exactly common once you get away from the mountains. Until one cool spring afternoon in 2004. I was in my final year at college, and I was driving back to campus in Tennessee after a short visit to my folks in North Carolina. It was only like a 4 or 5 hour drive via the most efficient route, and I had no need to be back at campus early, so instead of taking the freeway all the way, I got off and took part of my trip through the mountains. The scenery was nicer, and I admit I liked pushing my Camaro just a little faster than I should through the twisty mountain roads. Just after lunchtime happened upon one of those little by-the-highway tourist towns deep somewhere in the Smoky Mountains near the Carolina-Tennessee border. Nothing fancy. A gas station, truck stop, a diner, a couple of places selling tourist merch nestled deep in the mountains. I pulled into the gas station. My tank was getting low and I needed to stretch my legs, maybe grab something to eat. It was still early and I only had another couple of hours. I could kill an hour or so and still make it back to campus at a decent hour. I pulled into the gas station and was filling my tank when I happened to glance across the road and, well, I'll be damned. There it was. The Blue Ridge Alpine Coaster. Nestled on the side of the mountain was a building, a mock-up of a red barn, where a single railed track that led up into the mountains, where it soon got lost in the greenery. Wooden hand-painted standees of cartoon character bears dressed in stereotypical hillbilly get-up stood around, some of them holding signs showing the ride hours and ticket costs and other info. I had to admit, as silly as it was, it made me smile. I finished pumping my gas and, well, nostalgia is a hell of a thing. I decided then and there I could waste a little time riding an alpine coaster again after all these years before getting back on the road. I parked my car in a corner of the truck stop's parking lot, put my phone in the center console, this being the days before smartphones when people didn't keep their phones with them 24/7, and I didn't want my old Nokia brick phone to fall out during the ride. Locked my car and walked across the mountain highway to the Alpine Coaster building. Getting closer, the place was less inviting. The half-hearted attempt at a whimsical faux Americana kitsch was far less effective when it brushed up against the actual decaying run-down wooden building. Hell, calling it a building was generous. It was a wood frame holding up a long roof that covered the area where you got on the sleds. The wood boards creaked under my footsteps. The only real enclosed structure was a shack that held what I assumed was a ticket booth. A door on the side had both a single occupancy bathroom with an out-of-order sign on it. An old Pepsi machine buzzed and glowed next to it. Still, the place looked alive. Ahead of me, a bored-looking attendant was helping a mother and her young son into one of the sleds while in a bored monotone repeating the safety brief. A few people were waiting in line at the ticket booth. Up in the mountains, the playful shouts of people on the ride echoed down. Fond memories of my own childhood rides flooded my mind. 10 minutes and $15 later, I was settling into the hard plastic seat of a bright red sled, sat atop a simple aluminum rail. I couldn't help but grin as the sled slowly climbed the track up the mountains, making click-clack ratcheting sounds that hit my nostalgia centers hard. I felt good. The air was cool and crisp and smelled of pine. Higher and higher in the mountains we went. I don't know if this is my mind trying to make sense of it after the fact, but when I remember these moments, the last good moments, I sometimes think I remember a very slight, very subtle pit of fear in my stomach. I honestly don't know if I felt it at the time or not, or it's just how my mind tries to make sense of it looking back at. But either way, mostly I was enjoying myself. I smiled. I was a kid again. I could hear riders in front of me let out that initial yell of terrified glee you get at the first drop of any good ride. It peaked. I glanced around. I could see for miles, rolling hills and mountains. The sled tipped over and zoomed down the mountain, and I let out the same happy yell I heard from the other passengers. The ride zoomed down the mountain, catching speed. The mountain forest floor zoomed past. Only a few feet under me, trees zoomed past. I gave out a happy whoop as the ride banked hard around a curve and then looped back under itself. Another dip, another curve. I closed my eyes, enjoying the feel of the G-forces pulling me every which way. There was no one exact single moment where things started to go wrong. The ride kept going and going. At this point, the first creeping thought entered my head. The ride was still going. It just started to hit me. This ride was going on for a really long time. I had taken a dozen rides on various coasters of this type before that day, and they topped out at about 5 minutes or so. And that was the long ones. Longer than a traditional roller coaster, but not that long. This one had been going on for what felt like 10, maybe even 15 minutes. I looked back over my shoulder and could only see trees, moving too fast to really get a bearing on where I was at in relation to anything. I wasn't exactly really worried yet. Okay, so I had found a particularly long alpine coaster. At the time, I wasn't 100%, wasn't sure they didn't exist or anything like that. I was a little unnerved, but nothing was happening that was impossible, yet. I was trying to talk myself back into just enjoying the ride and stop overthinking it, and halfway succeeded, when out of nowhere I suddenly banked hard, the track jutting out almost over a sheer cliffside. I gripped the sled more tightly as I was whipped around. The ride then dipped hard and picked up speed, barreling down the side of the mountain. I was pushed back against the seat by the force of the drop. Jesus, I didn't remember them being this rough. I was feeling slightly nauseous, and where had this elevation drop come from, I wondered. I was still in the foothills, and I didn't remember seeing anything but gentle rolling hills and light drops from looking at the ride's route earlier. How the ride had managed such a long, steep drop in this area, I didn't know. For the first time, I hoped that the ride would be over soon. I had no idea then how much I would want that same hope to be true so much more as time went on. With a whiplash motion, I was whipped forward and then back as the ride leveled out on flat ground again. But by this point I was going fast. Too fast. My neck hurt from the mild whiplash, and I felt sour in my throat, and for a moment the contents of my stomach threatened to come back up. For the first, but hardly the last time the ride felt unsafe. Alpine coasters are tame affairs, much slower and gentler than full-on roller coasters, but this thing was throwing me around like no thrill ride I had ever been on. I looked around. I wasn't that deep into the woods. I should have been able to see a glimpse of something. The highway, the gas station, The tourist shops, the alpine coaster office, something, anything, but nothing, just trees. I forced back some panic for the first time. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. The ride zoomed along. I counted to 60. I counted to 60 again, and again. Okay, this was getting uncomfortably harder and harder to explain. Suddenly I noticed that up ahead the track seemed to just end. For one brief, terrible moment I thought the track just ended, but I was wrong. Almost without warning, the track dipped in an almost vertical drop. I almost screamed as I plummeted for 20, maybe 30 seconds before flattening out again. By this point, the voice in my head that was telling me something was wrong was louder, and I could no longer tell myself it was wrong. This ride could not have been this long. I tried to make sense of it, wondering if somehow I had gotten diverted onto some kind of maintenance track, or hell, for one brief irrational moment, even entertaining the idea that I had wound up on an actual train track somehow. But that was absurd. The rail below me was not a train track. It was still just the simple aluminum rail of an alpine coaster, and there had been no diversions or junctions in the track. I was still on the ride, as insane as that was starting to feel. Had the ride somehow looped? Again, after having the thought, I immediately dismissed it as crazy. There's no way I could have missed the ride building where I got on, and what kind of ride loops over and over? The sled zoomed through the forest, oddly never seeming to lose speed despite the relatively flat grade of the track. I cursed myself for leaving my phone in the car and not wearing a watch. I don't know exactly how long I'd been on the ride at that point, but it felt like I'd been on the ride for a half hour, maybe more. But time is a funny thing when you're in a situation you've never been in. Could have been more, could have been less. At that point, my pride finally failed me. I started to scream for help. I screamed out that the ride was broken, to stop it, that I needed help. I did that for about 10 minutes or so, I think. The ride kept going, mostly flat, level track with occasional mild dips and turns. But the simple length of the ride grew more and more unnerving and unexplainable. I thought about just bailing out. But the ride, impossibly, was still not slowing down, and chunks of mountain rock and thick tree trunks were all around me. Bailing out without risking smashing into a rock or a tree seemed impossible. The ride kept going. Up ahead, the forest was clearing out some. I could see the forest brightening, more sunlight making it through the canopy. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The trees stopped, and I had just enough time to take in a flat, open area of rock, maybe 40-50 yards at most, before another sheer cliff. The tracks twisted and turned and then shot straight down. But that wasn't the worst of it. For a moment, a very short moment, I had a clear view for miles, and the landscape was, to be blunt, totally impossible. Any possibility that I had just stumbled on some incredibly long ride was blasted out of my head. Barren, volcanic-looking rock stretched for miles. Jagged, black rocky outcroppings as far as the eye could see. I was in the goddamn Smoky Mountains. They don't look like that. I had a few moments for the terror of that view to settle in before the cart plunged into another horrifying drop. I gripped the handles of the cheap plastic sled until my knuckles turned white. The drop felt completely vertical, like I was falling at terminal velocity. I screamed. My stomach dropped and turned. I imagined the sled coming away from the track and me just plummeting, screaming to my death on the rocks below. But somehow the ride still functioned. I closed my eyes tightly and just waited for whatever was going to happen. Eventually, after several what felt like a full minute of steep plunging, the track again leveled out, and I opened my eyes to see myself moving at breakneck speed over that black, rocky landscape. Now that I was moving on a more or less flat horizontal track again, I took a few deep breaths. I looked over the edge of the track. Nothing but that black, jagged rock, almost looking like obsidian, zooming past. I had no idea how fast the sled was moving now. Fast, faster than a gravity-powered sled should be moving, and the track was higher off the ground now. Alpine slides usually stick pretty close to the ground, but I was 20 feet or so in the air, the track suspended in the air, a simple metal tube tower like a power pylon every few yards. Without any immediate threat, and the sled moving fast but steadily and level, I was able to think about my situation again, for all the good that did me. Ahead of me, the track just continued to the horizon. Nothing but the same rocky landscape as far as I could see. I craned my neck to look back over my shoulder and looked back behind me, and it looked the same. Even the mountains were but distant specks on the horizon behind me. This was insane. There's not a giant, seemingly endless field of black, jagged rock in the goddamn Smoky Mountains. There's no cliff faces tall and steep enough for a multi-minute vertical drop, and alpine coasters were small affairs, not major engineering projects that span miles with pylons and vertical tracks. It made no sense. Sadly, it wasn't going to start making any more sense anytime soon. The ride kept going. I was on this rocky landscape for several hours. I feel comfortable saying this because I could actually notice the sun getting lower in the sky, and the sled wasn't slowing down despite the grade of the track being flat. I was getting cramped from sitting and stretched my legs and twisted my back as best I could. Didn't do much help. My eyes were starting to get irritated from the constant wind in them. Worst of all, it was starting to get chilly. I only had on a light jacket, a windbreaker, just something to keep the breeze off me. No real insulation. I was cold. My joints were stiff. I was hungry and thirsty. My eyes watered and my throat was so dry it was sore. But none of that was as bad as just how little sense this all made. There's nothing like this place anywhere near the Smoky Mountains. This was like some volcanic rock landscape. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The ride kept going. My mind didn't even try to process this. Whatever I was experiencing simply couldn't be possible. I was crazy. I was dreaming. The CIA had kidnapped me and dosed me with some new version of LSD, and I was in a straitjacket in a padded room at Area 51. The sled kept zooming along as the sky turned to dusk. Soon the bridge disappeared from my view, and I continued on along the endless, rocky, featureless landscape. I sat back against the sled, mentally and physically numb. I was exhausted. I was thirsty. I was cramping up. I was hungry. I had to pee. I held it for as long as I could, then had no choice but just wet myself. I cried until I had no more tears left. Then I just sat there. The ride kept going. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, my throat felt like sandpaper. I dug around in my jacket pockets, hoping to find a stick of gum or piece of candy. Nothing. I checked again, having nothing else to do. Under a crumpled store receipt in the inner pocket of my jacket was a single old, forgotten cough drop. I unwrapped it from the paper and popped it in my mouth. Saliva flooded back into my mouth, and I was overwhelmed by the methanol and medicine taste. It was something at least, although I knew it would be a brief and temporary fix at best. I felt my eyes get heavy. It was getting colder. That mountain cold. That deep cold the mountains have even into the early spring when the sun goes down. That kind that just pulls the heat right out of you. I shivered. A terrible, horrible certainty came to me. I would ride until I passed out from exhaustion or the hypothermia set in. My body would tumble off the sled to fall and skip across the rocky ground like a stone skipping across a lake. My bones breaking as I tumbled until my body finally came to a stop. If I was lucky, I would be killed and not have to lie for days. Broken and bruised, on the ground until death took me. The ride kept going. The ride kept going. The fucking ride kept going. "Fuck you," I said to the ride, my voice a hoarse whisper. I pulled my jacket closer around me, for all the good it did. The cold wind was slowly but surely pulling my body heat away. My shivering got worse, crossing the line from a simple, normal shiver into those deep, almost violent full-body ones. I wasn't anything you could call an experienced outdoorsman, but I knew enough to know that wasn't a good sign. It was getting dark. There was a full moon at least, so I wasn't totally in the dark. About then I noticed something. The landscape, what little I could see in the fading light, was changing. It was smoothing out, becoming less rocky and craggy. Up ahead, an odd, shimmering light was starting to appear on the ground. I was over it before I even realized what it was. The tracks were going over a smooth surface. Water. It was a lake. The odd lights I had seen were the moon, reflected in ripples on the lake. Within minutes I was out of the view of the land, after the nearly endless rocky landscape and everything else I had seen. It scared me how little I was shocked. I didn't like how mentally numb I was getting. I leaned over. There was enough moonlight to see the water, 15 or 20 feet below the track. The pylons holding up the track went into the water. The light wasn't good enough to even make a guess at how far they went down or how deep the water was. I leaned back in the sled. My eyes were red and bloodshot from the constant wind. I closed them. This was a mistake. I jerked awake. I don't know if I dozed off for a split second or an hour. My weight had shifted, and I caught myself as my center of gravity was in danger of sending me off the sled and into the water. I screamed in anger, a deep primal scream. I hurt so bad. My joints felt like they were full of glass. My limbs were full of pins and needles. I glanced over at the water. For the first time on the very edges of my brain, a tiny voice started to speak up, telling me that I could be all over if I just jumped. I shut the voice up, but it scared me still. I sat there as the ride went on. It felt like hours. Eventually, the lake ended in a rocky shoreline. The damned ride. There was no safe place to bail out. If the ride slowed down, it was high in the air. If it moved toward the ground, it sped up. Sharp rocks, big trees, nothing you could safely bail out into. I kept having to force myself awake. I kept dozing off. Once I felt myself falling asleep and drove a vicious uppercut into my own nose to stave it off. I seriously started to think about how much longer I could hang on. The voice came back again. This time I didn't shut it up. I wasn't admitting it to myself yet, but I was starting to think about the best way to land that would end it quickly if I needed to. Something was ahead. The track seemed to dip into the ground. I was too tired, too beaten to even get scared. I was just resigned to whatever happened at this point. With little warning, the track took my sled into a tunnel in the ground. Everything went completely pitch black. After several moments, even the dim moonlight was gone. This was the worst part. The creepy forest, the immense rocky landscape, the eerie lake, those were bad. But this was just nothing. Nothing to look at. Nothing to hear. Nothing for reference or sense of where I was going. The walls of the tunnel felt like they were inches from me in every direction. The air felt thick, like there wasn't enough oxygen. With every moment I was in that tunnel, I lost a little more hope. After a long time, I made a decision. When I got out of this tunnel, I would jump. I didn't care anymore. Hopefully, there would be a spot where I could be certain the fall would instantly kill me. I was done. The ride had beaten me. I sat there, waiting for a chance to end this on my terms. That was all I had left. Eventually, up ahead, a tiny speck of light appeared. I gathered my strength, ready to end it. I sat up, getting my legs under me so I could jump as soon as we were clear. The sled burst out of the tunnel. The dim light of the full moon was enough to be momentarily blinding after the pitch black of the tunnel. I gave my eyes a moment to adjust. I was back in a normal-looking Appalachian forest. Rolling hills, green trees. The air smelled of pine again. I heard an owl hoot off somewhere. Slowly, I lowered myself back into a setting position, in shock. At first, I refused to believe it, but the ride was slowing down. I held still, making sure my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. But no, the cheap plastic sled that had been my world for what felt like an eternity was slowing down. Up ahead, a structure was visible, peeking out from among the trees in the dim lighting as the sled moved down the track. It was the Alpine slide building, the crappy fake red barn where I had boarded this cursed ride so long ago. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. Sure, it was either my mind or the cursed ride playing tricks with me. But the building stayed there. It grew closer and closer. The track leveled completely out. The sled slowed down more. Before I had the time to really come to terms with it, I arrived back at the building. The sled slowed to a stop, gently pumping against another sled parked on the track. I sat there for a few moments, gasping in great big gulping fear breaths, trying to assure myself the ride didn't have one last trick of its sleeve. I looked around. The place was empty, deserted. The overhead lights were still on, and the old Pepsi machine still glowed and buzzed. But the ticket booth was dark and empty, a metal gate pulled down over the ticket window. Suddenly it hit me that I was free, and I practically leapt out of the sled and onto the platform. I immediately collapsed. My legs were jelly and my head was spinning. I tried to stand up again and doubled over, Dry heaving. Have you ever been out on a boat for a day and have that weird reverse motion sickness when you're back on solid land? It was like that times 100. My inner ear was literally pounding. All the motion had really done a number on it. I laid there for a few moments and eventually forced myself to stand up on my two wobbling legs. I looked around, a horrible certainty creeping into my mind that there would be no exit. No way off the platform, but to my relief, an exit turnstile, one of those full-height ones, was set into the fence that surrounded the ride property. I went through it and found myself back on the main road. The truck stop was still there, still open but far less busy. My car sat in the same corner of the parking lot I had left it. I allowed myself one look back, just one quick one. The metal skeleton of the alpine slide track sat there, dark and quiet but otherwise normal. I stumbled, ran back to my car, dug the keys out of my pocket, and collapsed inside. When the door shut, I let out a primal scream, the tons of fear and confusion and anger all fusing into a single, raw emotion. I screamed again and again. After a few moments, I felt like I was emotionally at least back to a place where I could act, although I wasn't sure yet what to do next. Not really knowing what to do, I cranked the car. The AC had been on low when I shut off the car, and it came roaring back to life, and cold air blowing on me almost sent me back into a full-on panic attack. I fumbled with the climate controls until the air stopped blowing directly on me, then calmed down enough to turn the heat on, helping to get the chill out of my bones. There was a half-full bottle of water in the center console cup holder, and I grabbed it and chugged it. Nothing ever tasted as good before or since as that few ounces of water. That was when I noticed the clock on the radio head unit. It was 4:17 in the morning. It had been about 1:30 or so in the afternoon when I got on the accursed ride. Over 15 hours. I had been on the goddamn ride for over 15 hours. Over half a day. I just sat there, warming up, calming down. I was exhausted. I was dehydrated. I can't even describe how my head felt. I probably had at least a minor case of hypothermia. I thought about going into the gas station and asking for help, but what would I even say? And more than anything, I just wanted to get away from this place. And I just wanted to get away. I wanted to be nowhere near that damn ride. I put the Camaro in gear and pulled into the street, and in panic, I immediately slammed on the brakes. I was lucky there was no traffic on the road at that moment. The feeling of accelerating to just normal surface street speeds made me sick to my stomach. I gathered myself and very slowly accelerated the car I usually treated with a very heavy foot up to 30 miles an hour. Every time I tried to accelerate at a pace faster than old lady going to church. Uphill, I would have a panic attack. I was okay once I was up to speed, but accelerating freaked me out after being on that ride. I drove about 30 minutes, putting some arbitrary amount of distance between myself and the coaster. Eventually, I made it back to where the twisty mountain road met back up with a major road that would eventually meet back up with the highway. After a few more minutes of driving, I saw the on-ramp for the highway. There was one of those big truck stop travel plazas and pulled in, parking right up at the door. I smelled like pee, and I can only imagine how I looked, but I didn't care. I kept a couple of emergency 20s in the back of my wallet and spent it on the biggest bottle of water the store had, an overpriced bottle of eye drops, and a huge travel mug of coffee. The clerk looked at me as if he was expecting me to either drop dead or rob him the entire time. Back in my car, I downed the coffee. I put a few eye drops in each of my eyes and sat there as the caffeine took effect until I felt like I could make it back to my apartment. The sun was just coming up when I finally pulled out of the truck stop and got on the freeway. I slowly, very slowly, accelerated up to highway speed, put the Camaro in cruise control, and let the miles start to drift away. I turned on the radio. I needed to hear human voices. Every time my mind went back to what had just happened, I turned the radio up louder, eventually drowning it out with painful levels of rock music. I wasn't ready to think about it yet. Yes, looking back, I know I was just in denial. I finally made it back to the crappy little apartment I had off campus, a little 2-story walk-up studio. I let myself in and collapsed on the cheap couch. I was asleep before I even had the time to decide whether or not to do anything else. I woke up later that afternoon. I took a shower and ate a meal and didn't think about the ride. I washed the pee-stained, filthy clothes I had been wearing and didn't think about the ride. I went back to class and didn't think about the ride. Every time I thought about the ride, I forced it out of my head. I'm sure this wasn't the most mentally healthy thing to do, but what can you say? I didn't forget about it. Don't be silly. This isn't the kind of thing you forget. One day, while looking up something else in the university's library, my curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up the Alpine slide. No website, but a few Google Map and Yelp mentions. None of them mentioned anything weird, certainly nothing even remotely like what I experienced. Near as I can tell, it closed sometimes in the winter of 2012. Life went on. I mean, that's what it does. The next day was a little better, and the day after that a little better, and the day after that a little better still. I met a nice girl, graduated, got married, got a nice house in the suburbs, got a dog, had a daughter, spent a lot of time happy and not thinking about being trapped on an endless alpine coaster. And that was my life for many, many years after that. Until a few weeks back, when as a very different person, I found myself driving a boring and safe mid-sized family SUV through those same mountains. My wife Carol, 5 months pregnant, sat in the passenger seat. Our 6-year-old daughter Emily in a booster seat in the back, and Max, our mixed breed mutt, next to her. It had been a nice, pleasant trip, driving back from visiting her folks. I hadn't thought about that fucking ride in so long I barely registered that I was in the same general area until it was too late. Suddenly I realized that little mountain tourist trap town was only a few minutes down the road. I swallowed hard and gripped the steering wheel hard. Carol was looking out the window at the scenery, and Emily was deep into some kid's YouTube video on an iPad. I forced myself to keep my breath steady as we rounded the corner. The town was still there. Sorta. Time had not been kind to it. The gas station was still there. At some point it had been bought out by Shell. The tourist trap shops were still there. One of them was now a vape shop. The diner was closed, the building looking like it sat unused for a long time. But of course that's not what I cared about. I looked over at the site where the Alpine coaster once stood. It was gone. The kitschy fake barn was gone. The site was just a bare concrete slab with a chain link fence around it. Faded no trespassing and for sale signs hung off the fence. A pile of old, decaying lumber that might have once long ago been part of the structure covered part of the old lot. No sign of the track remained outside of some old concrete support posts dotting the side of the mountain. I exhaled out a breath I hadn't even realized I had been holding in. Soon the little town disappeared in my rearview mirror. About a half hour later we stopped for gas. I pulled up to a gas pump across from a massive motorhome. Max stuck his head out the window and started barking at a little white dog, a toy breed of some kind. In the window of the motorhome, Carol and Emily immediately headed into the store to restock on snacks while I fueled up. I stood there, a half smile on my lips, as Max barked and wagged his tail in an attempt to attract the attention of the other dog while I filled up the tank, said dog doing an admirable job of ignoring him. Right about the time I finished fueling up and cleaning the bugs off the windshield, Carol returned from inside the store, Emily in tow, arms filled with 2 full-sized bags of salt and vinegar potato chips and what looked to be a half-dozen individually wrapped pickles. I raised an eyebrow at the collection of food, but knew better than to question a pregnant woman's snack choices. "Should we take Max for a quick walk?" Carol asked. The travel plaza had a nice little gated dog walking area off to the side. "Yeah, probably not a bad idea. He's been cooped up in the car for a few hours," I said. Max, upon hearing his name and the word walk, forgot about the other dog and upgraded from wagging his tail to wagging his entire body while making whining sounds and staring right at me. About this time I became half aware that the big motorhome next to us was pulling away. I didn't think much of it, outside of doing a quick automatic mental check to make sure Emily was well clear of the moving vehicle, but she was safely between me and our SUV, well out of the way. But that was when Emily looked behind me and cheerfully yelled, "Daddy, look, a roller coaster. Can I ride the coaster?" It's cliche as fuck, I know, but my blood went cold. I turned around slowly, certain in my knowledge that terrible old decrepit alpine coaster would be there, having just popped into existence to trap me again. That is not what I saw. Sure enough, there was a coaster there, one I hadn't noticed earlier because it had mostly been blocked by the motorhome. But there it was. It was even an alpine coaster. But it was not the same coaster I had encountered those years ago. That was immediately obvious. It was a small but modern and newish looking setup with neon lights and a bunch of people. There was an actual building where you bought tickets and a little snack stand. "Daddy, can we go on the coaster?" Emily asked again. My mouth made motions but no words came out. I glanced over at Carol, hoping she'd say we didn't have time, but to my horror she smiled and said, "You know what? That does sound like fun. Daddy will take you while I take Max for a walk." My mind raced, trying to think of a way to get out of it, but Emily was already dragging me across the parking lot to the entrance. I patted my pocket, making sure my phone was in it. Every fiber of my being was screaming to run away. I walked through the line and the ticket booth while Emily bounced happily. We got into a 2-seat plastic sled. This one was actually a lot nicer than the one my mind wouldn't stop thinking about. It had 2 nice cushioned seats, big grab handles, even a nice roll bar. The sled started up the track. I fought back the panic. I swerved my head around, keeping the building in my view. I was terrified of losing sight of it. We made it to the top, and Emily did a happy squeal as we started down the side of the mountain. My heart raced. Any second, my mind told me we'd lose sight of the building, and then the ride would never end. The ride sped down the mountain. My mind tortured me with thoughts of not only going through it again, but seeing Emily go through it. The ride went around a big, banking turn. Emily kept shouting happily. How long before Carol reported us missing, I wondered. Could I keep Emily calm? What if it lasted even longer this time? What if this time it never ended? And then we were back at the start of the ride. The same attendant who had helped us into the sled was helping Emily out. I stepped out. The attendant gave me a brief look but said nothing. I guess I looked a little wild-eyed. I was fine. Emily was fine. It had been a perfectly normal, fun ride. That was fun, Daddy. Thank you, Emily said. I forced a smile back. It was fun, I responded, hoping like I sounded like I meant it. I took Emily's hand and we walked back to the car. Max saw us coming and barked happily. Carol looked up from the pint of Ben and Jerry's she had somehow acquired and added to her snack collection while we were gone and smiled at us. "Did you have fun?" she asked. "It was so fun, Mommy," Emily said. Carol smiled down at her, but then looked at me and frowned. "Are you okay?" Carol could read my face a lot better than the attendant could. "You're pale." I smiled, and this time the smile felt real. "You know what? Yeah, I think I am okay." Carol looked a little puzzled, but didn't press it. We loaded Emily back in her booster seat, stopped Max from trying desperately to eat half a discarded gas station hot dog off the ground, and got him back in the car. Carol and her small collection of snack food took her place in the passenger seat, and I got in the driver's seat. I smiled. I cranked the car. I put it in gear. I pulled out of the gas station and back on the road, this time accelerating just a little faster than I had in years. Story 2. All this for a pair of skates? Money's been tight recently, so I resorted to selling my stuff. I didn't really have anything of great value. It was mostly old clothes I'd never worn and shower sets I'd been gifted for birthdays and Christmases. I sold whatever I could on Facebook Marketplace and managed to earn an extra few quid. My wife even helped me out, sacrificing some of her belongings. "Jess, are you sure?" I said, looking at the pile of her possessions she'd laid out on the bed. "Yeah," she said with a shrug. "We need the money." Saddened that it had come to this, I reluctantly agreed. I thanked her and gave her a peck on the cheek. Most of the items sold quickly and effortlessly, and, 20 later, I was feeling glad I'd gone through with it. That is, until I got a message from Ken D. Ken D, are these still for sale? He was inquiring about a pair of rollerblades. Jess had always meant to learn to skate, but life did as life does and got in the way. Me, yes. Still available if you're interested. Kendi, okay. Will you do them for 10? I'd listed them at 20, as they were $50 when Jess bought them brand new. I thought $20 was more than reasonable. I told Ken this much. Ken D, don't have 20. Frustrated, I asked him what he did have. Ken D could do 10. I scoffed. I'm all for haggling, but Ken was taking the piss. Me, sorry. I can't do that. $20 is more than fair. Ken D, fuck you. I stared at my phone in disbelief that someone could be so offended over a pair of skates. Ken D is typing. Here we go, I thought. Ken D, this is a message of 10 years bad luck. You have 7 days to send this to 2 other PPL or else. Your bad luck will end when you send this to 2 PPL. Must be sent within 2 days or you have bad luck for our 10 years. I burst out laughing. Wow, did this guy really send me a chain letter? I hadn't seen one of those bad boys in over a decade. Me, thanks. Ken, have a good life. I decided that that was enough internet for one day. I put my phone on charge in the bedroom and headed into the living room to cuddle up on the sofa with Jess. You'll never guess what just happened to me, I said, wrapping my arm around her. Some guy just sent me a chain letter bringing me bad luck because I wouldn't sell him your skates. Jess sat up, smirking. What? You're kidding? I haven't seen one of those in ages. I know, I laughed. That's what I thought. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is the part where my luck progressively gets worse until I realize that, oh no, the chain letter was real. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but no, that's not what happened. You see, this isn't a story about a curse that was put on me by a guy named Ken D. This is a story about Ken D, an unhinged internet stranger desperate to buy my wife's rollerblades. That night, I was bombarded with messages from Ken, who was convinced he was going to get those damn skates. Ken D, did you get bad luck yet? Me, no, not yet. Ken D, I can do $12 for the skates. Me, sorry. I'm firm on my price, 20 or nothing. Had it been anyone else, I would have offered 15, but Ken had rubbed me the wrong way, so I decided to play hardball. Ken D, do 12. Ken D, do 12. Ken D, do 12. Me, look man, if you keep harassing me, I'll just block you. The skates are $20. Take 'em or leave 'em. Ken D, what do I have to do to get these skates? Me, pay 20. Ken D, ha, funny. Me, so is that a yes or no? I need to know before I block you. There was a pause. I thought perhaps he was going to fold. Ken D, I'll come to your house and kill you. And that's when I blocked him. I knew it was a harmless threat and he was just jerking me around. But it wasn't funny anymore. A few days passed and I got another offer on the skates. This time, from a woman named Brenda. Brenda, how much for the skates? Do people not read the listings? It was written right there on the advertisement. Still, maybe she was old. Brenda did sound like an elderly woman's name. Me, hi Brenda. The skates are 20, collection only. Brenda, what is your address? Me, can you meet me outside the Tesco Express down Greenway Court? Brenda, no, I'll come to you. What is your address? Me, I'd feel better if we met in public if it's all the same to you, just to be safe. Brenda, no, what is your address? I was getting weird vibes. Then I had a thought. Me, Ken. Brenda is typing. Then her account disappeared. It just vanished. I clicked on her profile picture, which was of a Cocker Spaniel wearing sunglasses, but the account was gone. Son of a bitch. I muttered aloud. It was Ken on another account. It had to be. This guy was a complete nutjob. Eventually, after a week or so, I finally got a serious-looking offer on the skates. This time, from a younger woman called Laura. I checked her profile and it seemed legit. She was married. She had 2 cats and was expecting her first child. She had hundreds of friends, a bunch of which seemed to interact with her on a regular basis, tagging her in memes and the like. Laura, hi. Those skates are awesome. I'd love to take them off your hands. Me, hi Laura. That would be great. Can you meet me outside Tesco Express down Greenway Court this evening at about 8 p.m? Cash only. 20. Laura agreed. And at 7:50 p.m, I headed out the door with the skates in hand, ready to finally be rid of them. I arrived dead on time, but Laura was late. I waited for about 10 minutes before dropping her a message. Me, hi Laura. I'm here. Everything okay? My message was seen, but she didn't respond. Still, I gave it another 10 minutes just in case. Me, I'm really sorry, but if you're not here soon, I'm going to have to go home. Again, my message was seen, but I received no response. I decided that waiting in the cold wasn't worth the 20, I'd just have to sell them to someone else. Though, given how much hard work that was proving to be, I wondered if maybe I'd be better just to cut my losses. When I returned home holding the skates, Jess gave me a disappointed look. No luck? No, I said, chucking them to the floor. I give up. I can't be arsed. Fair enough, Jess replied. It's only 20. I guess now I can learn to skate after all. A loud knock came from the front door. Jess and I looked at each other. You expecting anyone? She asked. No. When I opened up, there was no one there. I looked around, then noticed a crudely wrapped parcel on our doorstep. I bent down to pick it up. Did you order anything? I was about to call out to Jess, but then the stench hit me. The package fell from my hands as I retched, and the brown wrapping paper opened slightly, revealing a long, lifeless pink worm. Only, it wasn't a worm, it was a tail. What the hell is that? Cried Jess as she appeared from behind me. Stay back. I grabbed a stick from next to the flower pots and prodded the package. Out fell a dead rat, its organs spilling from a split in its side. Jess covered her mouth with her hand and quickly disappeared back into the house, gagging. After retrieving a pair of washing up gloves from the kitchen, I disposed of the rat. I was shocked, to say the least. I wondered who the hell would do something like this, but in the back of my mind, I think I already knew. When I logged onto Facebook later that night, I had a new message. Laura, did you like your present? Of course. It had to be Ken. One crazy person after the skates was strange enough, but two? Unlikely. I seriously doubted that Laura was real and was somewhat impressed by Ken's dedication and commitment. How had he managed to create such a convincing account so quickly? So, you think it was this Ken guy pretending to be Laura and then he just followed you home and left us a dead rat? Jess's eyes were wide with horror. Yeah, I think so. We have to call the police. So that's what I did. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. An officer was sent out the following day, but by the time he got to us, all the accounts had been deleted, including all the messages. He's deleted everything, I exclaimed. How's that possible? The officer seemed completely uninterested. You said this Ken left a dead rat on your doorstep. Yeah. And where's the rat now? Well, I got rid of it. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. What was I supposed to do? I asked, annoyed. Look, I'll be honest with you. It sounds like it was just a prank, a dumb prank, but a prank nonetheless. It could have been a lot worse. Great, thanks, I scoffed. I'll be sure to let you know when he does worse. Then, shall I? When would be a good time for you? Before or after he stabs me in my sleep? Babe, Jess put her head in her hands. No, I'm sorry, I said, exasperated. This is messed up. A guy leaves us a dead rat and the police don't care. Sir, calm down. This only angered me more. I sighed in frustration. The best thing to do would be to not respond to any more messages on Facebook. That's if you even get any. Keep your doors and windows locked. And, if you want to, maybe invest in some security cameras. Don't open the door without knowing who's there. I know it's frustrating, but that's really all I can do for you right now. Seems ironic, doesn't it? I said to Jess when the officer left. What? I put our items up for sale to make money. Only now I have to spend that money on cameras to keep us safe. Well, maybe the policeman's right. Maybe this is the end of it. The rat was his way of saying, fuck you. And now he's going to leave us alone. Hold out on the cameras for now. Babe, we'll see what happens. But of course, it didn't end there. The next day, my phone alerted me of a new message. Kendi, you told on me. What the fuck? His original account was back. How was he doing this? Me, dude, what is your problem? Kendi, my problem is you. I want the skates. 10. Me, I thought you said 12. Kendi, that's before you pissed me off. Me, I pissed you off. I got your present. By the way, hope you kept the receipt. Kendi, your wife is really hot, BTW. How much? I know I should have left it there. I know I should have ignored him. Me, fuck you. All this for a pair of skates? You can have them. Kendi, really? Me, yeah, for 25. A knock at the door startled me. I jumped up, legging it to the front of the house to finally catch this freak. But when I looked outside, I saw only another parcel. I sniffed the air, trying to detect what roadkill he'd sent me this time. But I was wrong. It wasn't a dead animal. It was much worse. Why did you respond to him? The police officer asked me when he returned. I didn't have anything to say. I just shrugged, looking down at my feet. Luckily, Jess had gone out to do our weekly food shop. I didn't want her to see this. Are you sure they're hers? Yeah, I'm sure. I was the one who bought them. The officer stared down at the underwear I'd laid out on the coffee table. Jess's underwear. Her used underwear. She was wearing them yesterday. I added. I saw her take them off and put them in the laundry basket. So, you think Ken broke in to steal them, only to return them? I know you're not taking me seriously. I said, defeated. And I know I haven't handled this well. I'm sorry. But yeah, that's exactly what I think happened. He's messing with me. Are there any signs of a break-in? I've checked the whole house. There's nothing. I have no idea how he's doing it. Spare key. I closed my eyes tightly, groaning. We keep it under the flower pot. Ah, I think you better call a locksmith. The more I thought about the situation, the less sense it made. When had Ken broken in? Where had I been and how had I not noticed? He'd have had to have let himself in the front door, walk all the way through the living room and up the stairs, cross the landing, find our bedroom, rifle through our dirty clothes, and then leave again. When could he have possibly done this without us noticing? My phone buzzed, interrupting my train of thought. Kendi, it's only going to get worse from here. Give me the skates. 10. Wait, this didn't make sense. Why hadn't he just taken the skates when he broke into the house? They weren't hidden. They were still by the front door. He would have had to have walked past them. Kendi, you're wondering why I didn't just take them? My heart sank. How did he know what I was thinking? Kendi, I want to buy them. Fair and square. 10. I considered it. I wanted this to be over. Who knew what fucked up thing he'd do next? Me, no. I shocked myself as I typed it and pressed send. Was I being for real? It's just a pair of skates, for crying out loud. But at the same time, it was the principle of the thing. We'd come this far. I didn't want to be bullied into giving Ken what he wanted. Besides, who's to say he wouldn't just take the skates and still harass me? Kendi, I'm getting those skates, and I'm getting them for 10. Me, we'll see. I bought the cameras. I changed the locks. Jess thought I was being ridiculous. We're losing money, she yelled. All because you're being a stubborn arsehole. He's the arsehole. I'm not going to let him walk all over me. You've just pissed away all the money we made on cameras and new locks. All because you want $20 for a stupid pair of skates. It's not about the skates. Of course it's about the goddamn skates, she screamed. You're just as bad as he is. She stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. She was right. I should have listened to her. I had sunk to Ken's level. I know I had, but it had reached the point where I didn't even care about the money anymore. I was seeing red, and I wanted revenge. I messaged Ken. Me, try getting in now. You fuck. I've got cameras everywhere. Ken D, like that's gonna stop me. Not 5 seconds later, Jess let out a scream. I rushed to our bedroom and found her in a heap in the corner. What happened? I asked. Running over to her, she pointed at the window. There was a face. She sobbed. I opened the window, looking up towards the roof, then down towards the ground. There's no one there. No, you don't understand. Jess was struggling to get her words out. It was just a face. She bawled her eyes out as I stared at her in disbelief. Then I heard a tapping coming from the window. I slowly turned around, and what I saw made me sick to my stomach. Jess wasn't lying. It was a face. Just a face. It hung in the air, void of a body. 2 bulbous white eyes with tiny pinpricks for pupils stared back at me. I'd have been convinced it was a Halloween mask had it not been for the fact it started to laugh. Very slowly it began descending, not breaking eye contact with me, its horrifying cackle unfaltering. It disappeared beneath the window. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do next. My phone pinged. Kendi, I want those skates. 10. I didn't want to play this game anymore. I don't know what Ken was, but I didn't want to find out. I charged to the front door, picking up the skates, and I launched them onto the front garden. Me, they're yours. I'm done. They're outside. A single knock on the door made me yelp. I waited, then cautiously crept to the peephole. There was no one there. Opening the door, I looked around. No one. I glanced down. There, in front of me, was a 10 note. My phone buzzed. Ken D. Pleasure doing business with ya. Story 3. The old lady in the bodega isn't what she seems. I think a lot about signals. Signals that show people what groups they belong to. Signals that hide the truth. Everybody uses signals to blend, entice, or trap. Grandma Pearl died not long after her stroke, and I've been making bad decisions ever since. Maybe my expectations are too high, or I'm just an idiot. Either way, I ran away from the group home to be with people who called themselves my family. They were the wrong people. They used the words family, brother, sister, and love like lockpicks, stealing trust, and taking self-respect. The only person I remember using the word family correctly was Grandma Pearl. She was a small woman who toured the US as an actress before settling with Granddad above their theatrical rentals shop. I was 3 when the car accident took Granddad and Mom, so I don't know if they used the word family correctly, but I hope they did. I was never as outgoing as Grandma, but that didn't bother her. She taught me how to watch people, how to see their signals, and how to listen. When she died, I forgot a lot of those lessons for a while. They called it a family. The family moved product. That product could be goods, drugs, or people. The uninitiated, like me, were distracted with food and a dry place to sleep. But it didn't take long to see behind the curtain. Things got too intense with the new family and I ran. I ran back to my old neighborhood. The buildings were familiar even if my home was gone. The old theatrical shop had been turned into a microbrewery after an appropriate amount of self-pity. 30 minutes. I wandered the alleys, picking up cans or scavenging for bits and pieces that could be recycled, used, or bartered. I recognized old faces, but I tried to stay out of sight. It was safer that way. The only place I allowed myself to be seen was the old Lutheran church on the park's far side. Most people who might have known me had aged out of the congregation or died. It was worth the risk because St. Lazarus had a food pantry in the basement and gave out lunches most days, so I wasn't always hungry, which was nice. I found a dry spot near the library to sleep, which seemed like a stroke of luck until it wasn't. I had the contentment that came with being in a familiar place. Little bits of comfort let me believe, for a moment, that I wasn't a screw-up and hadn't trusted the wrong people. That moment scurried away when Stick found me. Stick was a scary asshole. He technically wasn't in charge of the family, But he made it work. He got things done. I have no idea how old he was. He was all corded muscle and could clock in between 20 and 50. He looked half-starved and moved like a stalking predator, even with his limp. His left leg was stiff, the knee didn't bend, and any time he sat, his left leg would be splayed to the side like a kickstand on a bike. The leg was why he walked with a cane. The cane and how he used it was why we called him Stick. I don't know why he took the time to track me down. It's not like I was wanted. Maybe it was that I had become property. Property shouldn't just wander off. Sometimes you feel a person before you see them. The air is different. When Stick was around, the air felt dead and motionless. I knew I was being watched before I opened my eyes. Stick was sitting on a milk crate, his bad leg cocked to the side and his forehead resting on his cane. I pushed myself out from beneath the ductwork of the HVAC unit I had been sleeping under and slapped the dirt off my jeans. "I thought that was you," Stick said, as his sharp grin curved up to his unblinking dark eyes. Stick wanted my discomfort. I'd seen him play the intimidation game too many times. He'd act too friendly, and then when you were good and worried, quick movements, a hand around the back of your neck, and violence would be next. Then he'd act like the whole mindfuck was a big joke, like you were friends. And isn't it great that you can joke around with someone who really cared? It worked. 2. If you were the unfortunate focus of Stick's attention, you would be grateful when he smiled and said, "Just a joke. Kid, don't be so sensitive." I'd seen the pattern enough times to know Stick trained people like dogs with his hot and cold game. I didn't like the game, or the fear, so I changed the pattern. "Hey, Stick, did you come to help pick up cans?" I asked, making sure my smile reached my eyes. I was trying to be pleasant while ignoring the burning nervousness in my gut. It was still dark out, but I could see Stick's expressions well enough. Stick tapped his cane on the sidewalk and squinted at me skeptically before answering. "Just checking on my little brother." We were not related. Stick liked to call the uninitiated his little brothers or little sisters. He forced intimacy into his language. I didn't argue the point. Interactions went best with Stick when you agreed with everything he said. "Thanks, man," I complimented, trying to sound genuine and ignorant as I stepped forward and offered him my hand. Stick didn't move, but I could see that this conversation wasn't going as planned for him, and I forced myself not to react to his confusion. I couldn't break character, or he would know I was playing him. Stick tapped his cane on the ground twice, grasped my hand, and stood. He watched me. I held his stare, but in an open, naive, guileless way that I had perfected in front of the mirror as Grandma gave acting advice while she put her face on. I once asked Grandma Pearl why anyone would practice acting stupid. She pointed her mascara brush at me and, in her ditziest Minnesota nice character, said, "It's easier to be forgiven when people think you're a little dumb, don't you know? Like with most things." Grandma was right. Before I understood what had happened, Stick pulled me into his side and slung an arm around my shoulder. "You don't have a name yet. Everyone gets a name, but they don't get to pick it." He paused and gave me a Cheshire cat grin. "I have a name for you. Little brother. You are going to be called Slide." Then he held my chin and forced eye contact. "Your name will be Slide because I have never seen anyone slide out of shit faster than you. I can't tell if you do it on purpose or not. And I've been watching. I watch everybody. You do, too. Hell, this might be the first time I've ever heard you talk. So let's celebrate your name, Slide." Stick's smile slipped as he pulled me out of the alley. "We'll go do something special." I stayed silent, knowing full well what was coming. Being named meant doing something you could never take back. It was public and would put you in prison if the police ever took the time to look for you. It meant severing yourself from your life before and relying entirely on the family. I'd been absent each time naming seemed to be in the cards, but I couldn't duck out this time. There was only one place to go at this time of night that would have an impact: the bodega. The bodega was a red hole in the wall with a glass door papered over with grocery ads years outdated. Canned salmon 2 for 1 seemed to be the dominant theme. Although there were 2 large windows, one on either side of the door, you could barely see in. The right window was a tapestry of cigarette promotions. The left window displayed the only swath of uncovered glass with a view of the interior. From the outside, the view was of tobacco, lottery scratchers, and Old Lady Imatari. Old Lady Imatari owned the store. She was a short, dark-haired woman who always wore a long floral tank top. Grandma Pearl loved the old woman, but said Imatari looked like an old man's thumb all the years she had known her, and Grandma moved to the neighborhood with Granddad 30 years ago. Imatari was a local legend even then, because the bodega was open 20 hours a day, 365 days a year, and no one else worked in the store. Grandma used to make an extra strong coffee called Barako and chat with Imatari sometimes when work in the shop was slow. I would sneak out at night and try to catch Imatari sleeping, no matter the time. I never caught her snoozing, and she always saw me peeking at her through the window. I know she saw me because she would uncross her arms and wave her fly swatter at me. All these memories flicked through my mind as Stick smiled his too wide smile and pushed me into the bodega. Imatari flicked her fly swatter at me in acknowledgement, and her attention returned to the small TV she had nestled beside the cash register, which seemed to be the old woman's only real tether to the world outside her shop. The inside of the bodega was just a long hallway with shelves of convenience foods, drinks, home supplies, candy, and cold meds covering every available surface from floor to ceiling. The only break in the tunnel of products was the glass counter at the back corner of the store. Imatari presided over her mini-domain by casually ignoring her shoppers. I tried to make eye contact with the old woman again as Stick pushed me to the back of the shop, but after her initial acknowledgement of our entrance, Imatari's eyes stayed focused on her TV. As casually confident as possible, I walked to the cooler and grabbed an iced tea. "Want a drink?" I asked over my shoulder, my voice unusually steady, given the electric current of anxiety flowing through me. Stick sneered and tapped his cane twice on the ground. His eyes found all the security cameras in the tiny store, a frown creasing his angular features. I followed his line of sight and finally realized what had bothered him. The cameras were fake. They looked like security cameras, but they weren't. There were no wires or lenses, just rectangles and circles in a security camera shape. Stick took a deep breath and tapped his cane on the ground again. There is so much here to see, but no one is watching, he said with a sing-song. Then his sneer turned into a cruel smile. I knew Stick wanted an audience for what he would force me to do. The fact that the security cameras were fakes meant that whatever was going to happen would now have to be significant, an event that the neighborhood wouldn't be able to ignore. My stomach twisted with the thought. Stick waggled his eyebrows at me. He had been watching. He had seen my thoughts, and we both knew he had something terrible in mind. The cane twirled in Stick's hand and then tapped twice on the shop tile. "I think I want a little bit of this," Stick said, gesturing wildly with his cane, sending a row of soup cans tumbling to the floor. "And a little bit of that," Stick added, as another wild gesture sent cups of ramen spinning and knocking glass bottles of hot sauce to the floor. I stood paralyzed, unable to run. I was trapped with nowhere to duck away to. I didn't want Stick to hurt Old Lady Imatari, and I didn't want Stick to hurt me either. The truth was, he would hurt both of us no matter what I did. That was just the way Stick was. I'd seen him. I'd seen him show us who he was every day. Then I realized Imatari hadn't moved. She was watching her TV and chuckling at the sitcom as if nothing had happened. Stick glanced at me, confused. I almost felt sorry for the sociopath. His night was not going to plan. Imatari chuckled at her TV again, and a crease formed in the middle of Stick's forehead, letting me know that he was beyond angry. He was calm, dangerous, and vicious. People had been left for dead when Stick got this way. Stick raised his cane and flipped it so the handle jutted like a pickaxe. He was going to attack Imatari. Somehow, I moved. I didn't do much, but when I slid forward and grabbed the back of Stick's shirt, the cane missed Imatari, and the sharp handle punctured the thick glass top of the counter just above a roll of lotto scratchers. Old Lady Imatari slowly looked up into Stick's eyes and smiled. Her wide, gentle frown was replaced with a look of joy and something else, something primal, something hungry. Her pupils were blown, and I had the uneasy feeling that I was watching someone be served their absolute favorite meal. Before Stick could pull his cane from the punctured glass, Imatari casually reached forward, grabbed the cane, and pulled the wiry man forward. Small, old, and wrinkled, Imatari stared into Stick's eyes and overpowered him. Stick fell forward across the counter. He tried to push himself back, but Imatari's hand clamped down on his wrist like a vice. Bones ground together as Imatari pulled Stick's hand to her mouth, and with a swift, subtle movement, she bit off the tips of Stick's pinky and ring finger like she was sampling a cookie. I jumped back next to the cooler as a thin spray of blood arched toward me. Stick screamed and thrashed, but Imatari's small form was static and immovable. Stick was a fly in a trap. No matter how much he struggled, punched, poked, or kicked, he could not break the old woman's hold. Then, slowly, she took another bite. It was strangely fascinating watching the frail form of this old woman I had known for years take bite after bite out of Stick. This man, whom I thought of as a predator, a hunter, an enforcer, was crying and begging while an old woman, who looked like a wrinkled thumb in a floral top, quietly devoured him. I was surprised by the lack of blood after the first spray. I'm sure it was Imatari's crushing grip that stanched the flow of blood. The flesh of Stick's arm looked white from the pressure. Hand over hand, Imatari pulled Stick forward. Bones cracked as she gripped higher on Stick's arm, clamped down with her long leathery fingers, and fed the flesh and bone, one concise bite at a time, into her open, smiling maw. It was rhythmical in its simplicity. Chomp, crunch, chew, chew, swallow, over and over. The pattern continued until the begging stopped. Stick wasn't dead. He gave up, not struggling. He laid over the glass counter like a rag doll. He watched me glassily as Imatari took bite after bite, and I knew he wasn't there anymore. Whatever made Stick stick had either curled up and hidden in a dark corner of his mind, or had been devoured with his arm. The old woman seemed displeased that her meal had stopped struggling. She shook him, but he flopped, and his head lolled from side to side. Imatari frowned, let go of Stick's arm, and pushed down on the limp man's back. Blood gushed from the ragged stump, and Imatari lowered her mouth and drank from the wound like she was sipping from a garden hose. Stick didn't move. He just grew pale, and eventually, his panicked, shallow breaths ended, and the blood stopped flowing. Then Imatari stood. With a quick tug, she pulled Stick's body over the counter and let it flop to the floor at her feet. Her eyes closed. A contented smile bloomed on her face as the explosive sound of crunching and cracking bones echoed through the small shop. The deafening sound of crunching stopped, and only the buzzing of the drinks cooler reverberated through the small space. Imatari opened her eyes and watched me, a broad smile still on her lips. At that moment, I realized I could hear the drinks cooler so well because I had crawled into it, wedged between the glass door and the shelves. Imatari held me with her gaze as cords of pink flesh lowered from the ceiling and efficiently tidied up Stick's mess, lapping up blood and hot sauce, placing cans on shelves, and scooping up cups of ramen with whip-like tendrils. Then, the cords of flesh nudged me forward, and I stood before old lady Imatari. The thing that I had always thought of as a stern old woman handed me Stick's cane, with the same benign smile I remembered from buying red hots from it as a 10-year-old. It waved me away with its fly swatter, and the cords of flesh pushed me out the door onto the sidewalk. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.